and I call now on Deputy Michael Fitzmaurice to move the motion. Deputy Fitzmaurice, if you move, and then you have 20 minutes
I think it's
to contribute. And Minister Eamon Ryan is here to deal with the issue.
I think it's 15 minutes, and Deputy Pringle, is that correct? 5 minutes. Okay. First of all, thank you, Concordia. I move the motion, and this is in relation to the regulation of solid fuels. And I want to thank the Minister first of all for coming in. I know you have a busy schedule, and I want to thank you and the government for accepting the motion in its present form. And the reason I brought this motion, Minister, and I'm going to do this without notes or script, the reason I brought this motion was that over the last few weeks, as you're well aware, due to a PQ being asked, there is a lot of anxiety out there, especially among the elderly people right around this country. And when you talk around rural Ireland, when I talk about rural Ireland, I talk about, say, out the countryside, but also people in small towns right around the country that would rely on turf as a solid fuel. And what I'm going to deal with, and I hope that it's a respectful debate by everyone here, because what we need to do is find solutions, not be badgered at each other. And I noted, and I'm not whining about it, I noted that in the debate over the last few weeks that everyone talked about turbary rights. And I listened to, government backbench TDs and their thoughts on it, and I said we would put a motion together that would, clarify situations, which is very important for people out there where they feel that there's a vacuum in the information that's required. And the first thing that came up was, and it's on the motion, I'm going to go through the motion bit by bit because I nearly know it off by heart at this stage. The first thing that came up was basically the types of ownership. And, in the motion I'm asking that when you're bringing in regulations in September under the solid fuel, that the turbary rights was always the thing that has been talked about. And I would have spoke to people that would have fee simple rights, freehold rights, acquired rights, family rights, leasehold rights. You have commonage rights and in mountains and in different parts. You have squatters' rights. You have 10 different rights of ownership that people would have had down through the years. And indeed, as chairman of the TCCA, in dealing with dealing with the national parks on the designation, they would be very familiar with the different types of rights. And in fairness to them, they have recognised all those rights down through the years. And I think it's important, Minister, that rather than civil servants writing scripts or whatever, that it would be good to have a straight, open debate I'd be obliged if you take note in relation to the rights that I've talked about, that they are recognised, and those people, that it's not just, as the Taoiseach said one day, turbary rights. Turbary right is just one part of a right that's involved, and that you clarify, because clarification is needed in a lot of this. Then you move on to the second part of the motion, and what you must remember, I come from a place, Lisnageera Bog and Turlock. It's actually designated one side of the road, there's about 3,000 acres, and on the other side of the road there's about 100 acres between spread ground, and that does 80 families for all their lives, for actually about 200 years an acre of bog would last them. And on one side of the road, Minister, years ago, when the Habitats Directive came in, those people were asked would they move would they basically sell their bog, or would they move to a relocation bog if it was possible. And unfortunately, in some parts of the country, we haven't been successful in getting relocation bogs everywhere. Some people were asked would they take turf supplied by the state, which is done on a yearly basis, I think up until 2025 or 2026. And some people were asked to take monetary compensation and asked them to, buy turf somewhere else. And those people cooperated with the state. And then there was some achieved early on where people went under licence. And that's another right that no one seems to be familiar with. It was like a 65-year licence that these people have got if they went down the road 4 or 5 miles or up the road, because these were helping people in relation to the Habitats Directive and in relation to preserving a representative sample of bog in Ireland. And those people at the moment are left in a vacuum where they don't know, with some of the media coverage, and I'm not blaming you or anything, but with some of the media coverage of what came out, they don't know whether they're sitting or standing or whether they're coming or going. And I think that needs clarification. And then, Minister, you have people that traditionally, they could live in a town, they could live in a big town or small town, they could be out in the middle of the countryside. They might have a wet bit of bog themselves that they never developed and they left it there, and they might rent a plot from someone up or down the road, or they might have someone that gives them a plot, and they would be doing this historically for years. But look, they would have a right of renting, but they wouldn't have this Turberry right that you talk about. And I think that those people need to be exempted as well, as I've put on the motion, for the simple reason that we don't need to complicate this, and we need to make sure that there's clear messages sent out. And I think it's, for a department, it needs to make sure that it's, specifically categorises or explains the different things that there's no problem with, because only one liner was used in everything, a Turberry right. And that put a lot of people that had freehold and all that, it put them into panic, and especially elderly people that's solely reliant on it, on turf. So I would be obliged if you could clarify that you were willing to put an exemption in for all of those, and from the motion it's written in it, because that gives clarity to know where people are going on the different ways. Because when you rent a plot, just that you'll understand, you rented them, a person, it could be on someone else's ground, and you rent the plot, it's brought out and it's spread on the ground. They look after it then, they turn it and they foot it, and they might get someone to bring it home, or they might bring it home themselves in a car and trailer. It all depends. Generally not large amounts, but they do that. And I want to also say, Minister, before I go to the last section, that I don't think there's a TD in the Dáil, but they do support as much retrofitting as possible. I would have seen it as a turf contractor down through the years. As more insulation went into houses, they needed to cut a less amount of turf. Generally, tin hoppers was the general use. And when insulation went in, and I fully support this, that you'd see probably about 2 hoppers less being used on a yearly basis. And I think that message needs to go out from us here, that we're not against, we're not opposed to retrofitting, anything like that. We fully support it and have supported it. And we also fully supported you on the smoky coal, just to be clear on that, last year, and indeed in previous occasions. And the one thing that I think needs to be understood is that, be it social housing or be it people right around the rural areas, a lot of these people earn maybe 13,000 a year, and low-income families, and generally, I'll call a spade here. I grew up in it myself, beside a bog, was born, bred and reared in it, and people are maybe not be as affluent or as wealthy as people in other parts of the country, because the land generally isn't as good a quality either, that you need to put things into perspective. And then on the last part of the motion, I spoke about the government working with the industry. And, you know, when this came out, First Minister, it talks about a ban on selling turf for the placing on the market or the distribution or the selling of turf. And anybody that would understand turf or know about it all their life will know that there's a thing called, you know, good quality turf, and you let it season, you dry it and you let it season. And I understand, I've listened to some of your colleagues stating that peat briquettes were fine, but you can have a sada turf as dry as a peat briquette. And I know that you will probably say, and with no disrespect to you, that like the UCD and EPA, but what were the sampling? Because we have done samples and we have the results from it, and you can comply with the same as the timber. And last year when you brought in the timber, I would have been very outspoken that it was a problem that was happening around Ireland, that unfortunately timber was being cut, and sort of bad quality timber to make it worse, like the spruce and stuff like that, that you wouldn't be really getting. You might sometimes be as well with Irish Independent when you'd be burning it in the fire because you go that quick. That they were cutting it today and maybe splitting it tomorrow and then selling it the weekend. And that's no good. We all know that. It's basically a bit of common sense. And if we learned anything from the generation that's gone by, you were always taught from knee high that you'd cut timber in January or February, and what we call in rural Ireland, you let it season. There's more sophisticated ways. There's kennel drying, but there's also there's a thing called putting it into a shed where a good breeze can get at it, and over the summer months and into the back end of the year, it would season. So I would have looked at turf and the test that we done, and I'll be very honest about this, the test that we have done is on turf that was cut last May. It's a year now. It was done a month ago, and the moisture content was extremely good. So, and like another thing that needs to be understood, if you listen to the generation that's gone by, an awful lot of people, they sort of have like a store where they keep a year or two supply ahead of themselves, because there's a saying down the country that it is like flint to be gone that dry and that tough, and there's, you know, good quality burning in it. And I think that an understanding needs to be got of that. I think that the industry will work with you, but and I think with everything that I have looked at, that you don't have to go pressing a destruct button by saying we need to ban the sale of turf. Yeah, there's regulations you'll be looking at under your air quality and all that, but in my opinion, from everything we have seen, there is absolutely no need for that. And the one thing I'd always say to you, Minister, is, and I know it's not your fault, but like down through the years, we're looking at the amount of coal that goes into to keep the lights on in this country. And the EPA give a licence to burn tyres, and then there's a feeling at the moment, and this is being honest with you, that the ordinary people that's being picked on, and they're not happy about that, to be quite honest with you. And it's not alone coming from people that, you know, cuts turf. It's coming from people that might, you know, they've basically, they throw their head up in the air and they say, Jesus, what's next? Like, or you know, we're looking at the small fry compared with what's going on right around the world. But I think that it is very important that clear messages come out. I think it's very important that we resolve this issue, because we cannot have a situation with, especially if you look at the age profile, and I look at the age profile I would do work for, They're all, I'm grey hair myself, but they might be a bit greyer, they'll be a bit older. And, you know, I have watched down through the years that it's like at the moment we're using a sledge to crack a nut because it will phase in its own way, in my opinion, in the next 10 to 12 years. The next generation that's coming after us are, you know, when they build new houses, they're going air to water, they're going down a different route, and nobody has a problem with that. And I think after the 10 or 12 years, we should have a system in place where it's beneficial to the farmers or the owners, regardless of what they are, because it's not all farmers. You must remember one time ago when you got a council house, it was called in the rural areas, that you got a turf bank or a turbary right, as you would have spoke about, with it. And you wouldn't own an acre of land because the old saying was that it went with the chimney of the house. And that would be effective, you know, Portnamona, for example, built houses in County Roscommon and gave their workers or lived in the houses, and they would have got turbary rights for cutting turf. And we have to be very careful that it's not just someone abroad in the sticks that might have a turbary right. It's like where I live, it might be someone in a medium-sized town or a smaller town. And the other thing is that family members, and I think it's one thing that needs to be noted, that an awful lot of parents, one of their wishes when they'd be doing out a will or whatever, they'd always say that whatever members of the family needed to get a bit of fuel for their fire, that it needed to be done. So I thank you again, Minister. I want to give Deputy Pringle, I've gone over my time, I want to give Deputy Pringle time, but okay. I thank you for accepting the motion, and I thank you for coming in. And I think that we need to resolve this issue for the people out there, because the anxiety that has been among the communities, because look, I'd be going through them day in, day out, shouldn't be, and mixed messaging isn't a good thing. Thank you very much.